On a system that works, that underpins the Irish banking system.
David McCullough, RTE News, Leinster House.
Talks are underway between the banks and the financial regulator about more supervision of the financial system here following the state guarantee. The financial regulator said enhanced regulation would cover corporate governance, business plans and strategies of banks. Our business correspondent David Murphy reports.
Around the world, banks have been falling like dominoes, so the Irish have come up with their own solution, which is to guarantee all the debts and deposits of the Irish banks. But like any deal, the devil is in the detail. We know the deal is subject to terms and conditions, so what's in the small print? The Minister for Finance has taken over the powers to approve bank mergers from the Competition Authority. He can also take shares in Irish banks. If he does give financial support, he can recoup the money and impose conditions on banks.
1 in 3 banking crises around the world end up with a government guarantee, but they're costly. We find that those crises end up costing the government more. And to prevent that, there needs to be intensified supervision and prompt corrective action for any bank that gets into trouble.
As the Irish market continued to warm to the deal, bank shares climbed for a second day. NCB stockbrokers said in a worst-case scenario, the deal would cost the state €14 billion. But did the government have an alternative?
The line the government is taking on this may sort out the symptom without sorting out the problem. Therefore, I would prefer to see them doing something else. I would prefer to see them using upfront money rather than an insurance total, in effect to help recapitalise the banks, and that would mean basically the exchequer subscribing for shares.
The regulator said there'd be much more regulation of banks as a result of the deal. So will he sit on the board of the banks?
I won't rule out anything at this stage. I think it is important that whatever measures we put in place give confidence to the taxpayer in relation to the guarantee, and that is workable and pragmatic for both the regulator and for the banks.
The fact the banks are going to face an awful lot more regulation shows that everything has changed after this deal. Another thing that's changed is that Ireland is going to have to pay more for borrowing money in future, but the banks are going to have to pick up the tab for that, and they'll have to pay a lot more too. David Murphy, RTE News, Dublin.
Our political correspondent David McCullough joins me now. David, so before this bill is even fully debated, the Minister is considering a possible extension.
Well, what he said in a statement is that he will consider any applications from financial subsidiaries with a significant high street or retail presence here in Ireland on a case-by-case basis. Now, there's no scheme in existence yet because the legislation hasn't been passed, so the department hasn't received any formal applications, but I understand a number of submissions of interest, is the way they were putting it, have been received. So it seems clear that the government will certainly consider this issue. It's an issue that's been raised in the Dáil, particularly by deputies from the border constituencies where Ulster Bank has a very strong presence. It's owned, not Irish owned, so therefore it doesn't come under the scheme as drafted at present. The problem, and this problem has been recognised by Enda Kenny when he raised it earlier on, is how do you ring fence the Irish operations? If it's a foreign owned bank, it obviously has operations elsewhere. How do you make sure that the Irish guarantee doesn't end up guaranteeing deposits and loans in other countries? So that it is a difficulty, but certainly it's something that the government seems to be prepared to at least consider.
And it's certainly been a protracted process so far, and the Dáil and Shannon facing into another late night.
Well, that's right, Anne. The debate on the bill adjourned at 5:30 to allow for 3.5 hours of private members' time on a Fine Gael motion about energy poverty, an important issue no doubt, but it does seem a bit strange when this is emergency legislation that has to be rushed through, that time would have been taken out of it. Now, after that motion ended, the party whips, the people who organise business in the Dáil, were meeting up to a minute or two ago to discuss how the debate is progressing so far. It's progressing extraordinarily slowly. There's 28 amendments to the legislation. We've still on amendment number 1, so we'll have to see if there's some way of speeding up the debate, but certainly there does seem to be an intention to get it through the Dáil tonight, to get it immediately then to the Shannon at whatever time of the night or morning that might be, and to have it through there sometime in the early hours of the morning. But as I say, hopefully there might be a way of speeding up the debate. We should find out fairly soon.
David, many thanks for that. The British Bankers Association claimed tonight that the Irish Bank Guarantee Plan has distorted competition. It announced it would take up the matter with the government and said that there had to be what it called fair play for financial institutions across Europe. The European Commission says it will determine if the Irish move breaches EU state aid rules once it received all the relevant information.
Today, Europe was trying to pull together a common approach to the crisis, while at the same time coming to terms with Ireland's decision to guarantee deposits in Irish banks. The move has infuriated British banks, whose Irish branches won't benefit. The European Commission says it's checking if the guarantee breaches rules governing state aid.
So I would like to plead to national governments today not to act unilaterally, but rather to continue their practice of consulting the Commission when governments are confronted with problems. Just take the telephone and just give the opportunity that we give you a hand.
In Paris for talks on the Lisbon Treaty, the Taoiseach said President Sarkozy was fully aware of why the Irish government had to act as it did. As for reports that Gordon Brown was unhappy,
well, I think, Prime Minister Brown obviously is reflecting, will be reflecting some concerns that are being raised by banks in Ireland who are not incorporated in the state. And obviously what we have to do is, each regulatory system, every state is responsible for its own banks that are incorporated in their own respective states.
But Charlie McCreevy clearly has sympathy for the Irish decision.
Having been a minister in a member state government, member state governments don't have the luxury of waiting forever and a day to make up their minds about critical matters.
Today, Mr. McCreevy published new rules designed to head off another credit crisis. Banks will have to tie up more capital to cover risky operations. They'll have to keep a 5% share in any debt they sell off, which may discourage subprime mortgage securitisation. And there'll be a new college of regulators to monitor European banks with cross-border operations. Sean Whelan, RTE News, Brussels.
In the United States, the Senate will tonight vote on a multi-billion-dollar rescue deal for Wall Street that Congress rejected on Monday. Political leaders hope a yes vote by senators will see a second vote succeeding in Congress by the end of the week. The Senate vote is expected shortly after midnight Irish time.
As America still pushes for a deal on bailing out bad debt, world markets watch and wait, hoping the plan will eventually go through and will fix things. Tonight, the Senate votes on the deal rejected by Congress in a shock decision on Monday.
We've got to get this done. We cannot leave Washington without doing the financial rescue package.
After Monday's vote in the House, the question is not how we got here, but how we get out.
The getting out has involved tax breaks and better guarantees for savers. The White House is watching closely.
We think we can get this legislation across the finish line, but we're going to keep working today, and we're going to work tomorrow when the House takes it up.
On the campaign trail, Senators Obama and McCain know this is hurting Main Street and voters.
But while the decline of the stock market's devastating, the consequences of the credit crisis that caused it will be even worse if we don't act and act immediately.
If the financial rescue bill fails in Congress yet again, the present crisis will turn into a disaster.
Devastation on Wall Street was followed by some recovery. If politicians can finally agree, it's hoped that could continue. Whatever the Senate decides, though, a second vote is still needed in Congress. Ray Kennedy, RTE News.
Our economics editor George Lee joins me now. George, looking first at the situation at home, Mr Lenihan has now said that he's prepared to consider applications from non-Irish owned banks to join the guarantee scheme. What are the implications of that?
Well, they're quite significant in terms of how important it now becomes to get the terms and conditions of this deal. Because we started off knowing that there was a liability, a contingent liability for €400 billion of various banks' liabilities. Now it looks as if it's growing because other banks are going to be included. Now, one of the things is we don't really know the condition of a lot of those banks. For example, 10 days ago, one of the banks was about to take over another one. They were so strong, we were led to believe. 2 days ago, the government had to step in. Otherwise, there would have been some catastrophic, according to the regulator, consequences in terms of the supply of liquidity. So do we know what's going on or what the banks are telling us, or can we trust it? That's the first thing that people have a reasonable question mark over. The second thing is that the issue in relation to what the government did is aimed primarily at providing liquidity to the banks in relation to the situation they were in, particularly on Monday evening. And the share prices came back up, and we've heard 2 days of recovery, but the share prices are only back to where they were basically last week or the week before. That's where they are. It addressed the liquidity situation. That's what it was aimed at, and that's the number one priority. But in doing it, we gave a guarantee to all of the deposits, the corporate deposits. That's what all the foreign banks are coming looking for. They want the bigger guarantee. They're not coming for the liquidity that the Irish government is saying that they're trying to resolve. So it becomes really important then, what are we writing in terms of a cheque? We want to ensure that the banks have the liquidity, and the consequence of it are competition issues which enable these banks to apply, basically to participate in the programme for a different reason. So on what terms and what conditions are we giving this? That's why it becomes important. The legislation may be passed after the 29 different things are added to it or amendments are discussed, but even that legislation is so broad we won't get the terms and conditions. So we need to move fast on this, otherwise it gets very big.
And of course, global uncertainty remains, even that US rescue plan still very much up in the air tonight.
It does, and that is the key thing. And remember, our Irish bank shares, we've had a big bounce, but they're only back to where they were before we had the potential catastrophe earlier this week. That means that the condition in the global markets which are contributing to this remain. And we have to watch what goes on in Wall Street and watch what goes on in Washington, because everybody is expecting that they'll pass it this time. If they don't, the global markets are back to where they were. The credit conditions are frozen, and we're back exactly wondering what's going to happen with the bad debts that we don't know our banks have because they won't tell us.
George, thank you for that. And then we take a break. Still to come on the 9 o'clock news. The worsening problem of homelessness. We look at the situation in Cork. And the premiere of an award-winning documentary unboxing dreams and glory. You're welcome back. The number of people signing on the Live Register has increased by almost 50% in the past 12 months. Separate government figures also show an increase of over 100% in officially notified redundancies last month compared to September last year. The news came as it emerged that 26 people are to lose their jobs at the Odlums plant in Sallins in County Kildare.
It didn't need further bad news, but the government got it today in the form of the latest seasonally adjusted Live Register figures. They show that last month numbers signing on increased by over 9,000 or 4%. The total register at 244,000 is up a whopping 48% since last September. Almost 2/3 are male.
Unfortunately, job losses are likely to continue here. We're seeing bad news on the job front right across Europe also today, and I'm afraid it gets worse before it gets better.
Other government figures confirmed the trend, showing the official number of notified redundancies rose by 4,000 last month, more than double September last year. And according to one employment organisation, if those in jobs now are not upskilled, up to 27,000 of them who will lose their jobs may never get another.
If we do nothing about it now, what we're going to have is we will have a kind of an ironic situation in a number of years' time when we have an upturn in the economy, and we're going to have a permanent group of unemployable people because they simply won't have the skills that an advanced economy will need.
We really do need to find the resources. I know they're going to be difficult to find, but to try and address this issue and to invest in alternative employment, education, training. Otherwise, we're going to have bigger, longer-term problems.
Reacting to the figures, the Taoiseach and Minister for Enterprise said the economic downturn had inevitably led to job losses. But she said that the state training agency FOS had refocused its efforts on getting those who had become unemployed straight into retraining. And she said that the pipeline of new jobs coming down the track was good. But not good enough, say the opposition and small businesses, who branded the situation a crisis and challenged government to take action as swiftly on employment as they did on the banks. Will Goodbody, RTE News.
In Cork City, there has been a 50% increase in the number of people being turned away from Simon's emergency shelter in the last 3 months because there isn't room. Politicians from all parties have been told they must act to address what has been a dramatic rise in homelessness throughout the country.
The nightly Simon Soup Run in Cork City Centre. 2 volunteers hand out food, hot drinks, blankets and cigarettes. Most importantly, they make time to talk to their mostly male clientele. For most of this year, they've been helping an average of 23 individuals. We met a dozen last night. Most were non-national men who had significant health, language and social problems. none were working.
Some are living in squats, and some are on different parts of around the city, like in different doorways and different parts of the streets. Yeah.
Some nights now we'd use all the blankets we'd bring out. Tonight I've only given out 2, and it's not a very warm night.
2 young Irishmen from outside the city, one 22, one 18, meet the volunteers for the first time. They've been squatting and have been joined by a young girl who they say has just run away from home.
Well, I think it reflects the dire straits that some people find themselves in, and when you don't have enough beds to offer people, you know, the people are on the street, and I suppose the government strategy for 2010 is to end street homelessness. The difficulty with that, I suppose, is that there's not enough resources here at present to deal with the numbers of people that you know, come for beds.
Can you offer those 2 men a bed?
Well, tonight no, because the shelter is full.
Each morning, the dozen or so people Simon have turned away the previous night, and many other rough sleepers come here to its emergency shelter, where they're offered a hot breakfast, a shower, the laundry, and the services of the homeless medical team. Joe Little, RTE News, Central Cork.
Spanish police say they've arrested 121 people as part of the biggest ever operation against internet child abuse. Police say 2 of those held were using their own children to make pornography. A further 96 people have been charged with possession and distribution of images of children being abused. Millions of archives of videos and photographs, as well as computers, were seized. A network for exchanging the material with 75 countries was also uncovered. Hikers in California have found items belonging to missing adventurer Steve Fawcett. A sweatshirt, cash and a pilot identification card with Fawcett's name were found near Mammoth Lakes. The 63-year-old was last seen at the beginning of September last year when he took off in a single-engine plane for a pleasure flight over the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Last February, a judge declared Steve Fawcett legally dead. The trial has begun in Limerick of a 20-year-old man accused of dangerous driving resulting in the deaths of a Garda and a fireman. The court was told that Niall Shannon of Ballylongford in County Kerry was driving so fast that he failed to stop and struck the 2 men who were attending the scene of an accident.
20-year-old Niall Shannon is pleading not guilty to a charge of dangerous driving causing the deaths of Garda Brian Kelleher and fireman Michael Liston outside Foynes on February 25th last year. He also denies a charge of driving with excess alcohol and driving a car with 2 worn front tyres. Outlining the case to the jury this afternoon, prosecuting counsel John O'Kelly said the charges arise from a tragic accident which happened shortly after 5 a.m. that morning, in which a car driven by Niall Shannon came upon the scene of another crash and knocked down and killed the 2 officers. Because of the earlier accident, there were flashing lights on the road, in addition to a fireman using a flashing stick to warn oncoming motorists. He said Mr. Shannon's car drove right past the warning fireman, who had to get out of his way, and drove into the scene of the other accident where Garda Kelleher and Michael Liston were working. His car hit the open door of a fire truck and then struck the Garda and fireman, throwing them into the air. Mr. O'Kelly said for someone to drive in such a manner that he failed to stop, not just when there were flashing lights on the road, but also when there was a uniformed fire officer trying to flag him down, is evidence of the most dangerous driving you could possibly conceive. He said Mr. Shannon was driving his car at a speed so fast it propelled the 2 victims into the air, one into a wall and the second 30 metres down the road. In addition, he said there will be evidence of driving with excess alcohol, which the jury can also consider when deciding on the charge of dangerous driving. Cathy Halloran, RTE News, the Circuit Court, Limerick.
The National Roads Authority has admitted that 1,000 people a day are being billed incorrectly by the new barrier-free tolling system on the M50. It says the main reason is that tags haven't been properly placed in cars. Some drivers are reportedly waving them out the window as they pass toll scanners instead of sticking them to the windscreen. A high turnover of staff at the Customer Services Centre has been blamed on the level of abusive calls staff received from members of the public. An award-winning documentary about an inner-city boxing club premiered in Dublin tonight. Saviours tells the story of 3 young boxers, including Olympic medalist Darren Sutherland.
Olympic medalist Darren Sutherland, one of the stars of Saviours, arrives with his girlfriend Hazel at Dublin's Lighthouse Cinema for tonight's movie premiere.
So when I went back down when I was 8, he says you had to be 9. I say, nah, he's messing and all that.
St Saviours is one of Dublin's oldest boxing clubs. Now a documentary about the famous club has hit the big screen. Filmmakers Ross Whittaker and Liam Nolan spent 2 years at the club where so many dreams began. One of those boyhood dreamers went on to become an Olympic medalist.
They definitely keep me grounded, especially now with the attention that I've had after winning an Olympic medal and getting ready to go professional. I still come down here and I'm just one of the lads.
We're proud of them all in the gym. You know, all the kids that work there, like, it's the work that they put in. We're just there with them as, you know, buffers for them, but, you know, they're the guys that put in the work.
What's your best bit of advice?
Just stay clean. Just live a good life, you know.
There's such a warm family atmosphere around here. Coaches do a lot of good work for the area. So yeah, we spend enough time here to capture the true essence of the place and the smell of the place.
I don't feel I deserve to go to a competition like that because I haven't prepared.
As Darren Sutherland prepares to turn pro, the film shows how he nearly took a different road. In Saviours, we see how Darren Sutherland nearly quit his boxing career and that Beijing bronze. So this is where it all began for Darren Sutherland. There's a poster on the wall inside which sums up the philosophy of the club. It says, winners are willing to do what losers won't. Gareth O'Connor, RTE News, Central Dublin.
And the main news again. The debate on emergency legislation on the bank guarantee scheme has just resumed in the Dáil. Tonight, in a statement, the Minister for Finance, Brian Lenihan, indicated that he would consider applications from non-Irish owned banks that had a significant high street presence here. And that's Wednesday's 9 o'clock news. A reminder that Eileen will be here with RTE News on 2. That's at 11 o'clock tonight. From all of us, take care. Good night.
Look forward to getting home to something fresh, wholesome and fast.
Good evening. Well, tomorrow's going to be another very cold and a very windy day with some heavy showers. Something of a respite on Friday.